So next up is Clem Starck from Dallas, Oregon, former merchant seaman, and he is now a retired carpenter. Please welcome Clem. He's one of my favorites.
I've been coming to FisherPoetry Gathering 15, 16 years now. That's the first time I think I've ever read at the Liberty Theater. It's a great venue. So, as Rob said, I'm not a commercial fisherman. I was a merchant seaman. I sailed with the Seafarers International Union, the SIU, back in the 60s for a while. So I'm going to read a few seagoing poems here. First one. So when I sailed, it was in the late 60s during the Vietnam War, and most commercial shipping off the West Coast was commercial shipping companies that were under contract to the U.S. Navy, a division of the U.S. Navy called the Military Sea Transportation Service, MSTS. That's mentioned in this first poem. So this first poem is actually a little story of my first trip to sea. It's called Honolulu. It was all new to me. When the crew messman went berserk, we were 3 days at sea. Long Beach to Yokosuka on an MSTS charter. First we had to catch him. He was fast and crazy. Then he was straitjacketed, sedated, and chained to a bunk in the ship's infirmary. Under new orders, we changed course, steamed north to Honolulu, docked 2 days later, put him off, and took on bunkers there. That night, standing gangway watch, the warm Hawaiian air redolent with the smell of diesel fuel, I thought of the crew messman. Both his arms were covered with tattoos, dragons and roses, names of women, elaborate patterns of blue and red. And here's another one from that era. Most of you know what the title of this refers to, an ammo ship. So we were hauling war material to Southeast Asia. So it came under special regulations when we came into port as an ammo ship. Mostly we hauled asphalt, tens of thousands of drums of asphalt. The master plan called for Southeast Asia to be a parking lot. If it wasn't asphalt, it was bombs. The bombs were for the enemy. One trip, 4 days out of Southern California in heavy seas, the cargo began to shift. We climbed down into the hold with shoring timbers and wedges. The bombs in their fragile wooden crates tossed about like restless sleepers, a nightmare screech of nails pulling and wood splintering. The rest of the trip, morale was low. Not even the cook's special blueberry pancakes helped. The people the bombs were for scattered, deer at the start of hunting season. They knew we were coming, and they were scared too. So it's another true story. So one trip, we were on our way back. We were deadheading from Okinawa, Naha in Okinawa, on the Great Circle route back to Newport, Oregon. And learned about this story, which took place, as the poem tells, 100 miles or so north of us. So the name of the poem is the name of the ship that was involved, called the Pan-Oceanic Faith. The night the Pan-Oceanic Faith went down in a storm in the North Pacific, we were 100 miles south of her, another freighter plowing through stormy seas. As it turned out, she was a sister ship, SIU, like us. 2 of our crew had boarded her in Seattle months earlier, but something about her spooked them, and before she sailed, they signed off. The sea that night was wild, green water breaking over our bow. I had just been relieved at the wheel when Sparks stepped into the wheelhouse to report to the mate that he'd picked up an SOS. When Conrad wrote, "The sea came at us like a madman with an axe," he had it right. 10,000 tons of welded steel plate buckled and smashed by water. 3 survivors out of a crew of 42, a messman, the chief engineer, and 1 AB. Why those 3, we wondered, all the rest of the way into Newport, Oregon, and looked around uneasily, weighing our chances, sizing each other up. So this next poem has a, make sure it's the next poem. The title of this next poem is called, it's called Snatch Blocks, Curveballs. If you don't know what a snatch block is, just think block and tackle. A snatch block is a particular kind of block or pulley in which you can admit the side of the housing in order to introduce a line. So, snatch blocks, curveballs. When a worn snatch block in the rigging broke loose, it struck me square in the chest with such force it nearly knocked me overboard. A few inches higher, it would have done damage to my physiognomy. When my wife was diagnosed 4 years ago, it also caught me by surprise. But fortunately, it's not like I'm some rookie just up from the minors who can't handle a major league curveball. All will be well is the mantra I keep repeating. And if not well, then at least over. Like the Russian said, sure, life is tough, but fortunately short. So here's another one, a little short poem called On the Hook in Manila. On the hook, of course, meaning at anchor. On the hook in Manila. Riding at anchor in Manila Bay after 10 days at sea, watching the moon rise over the city sparkling below. The 4 of us, a scruffy bunch, Mike the oiler, Jake, and crazy Bob and I, are at the rail, midships, waiting for a launch to take us ashore. Although in no way could we be said to resemble the 4 celestial worthies, much less the equally venerable four perfected lords of Wu. The four of us gaze shoreward, half convinced that every bar girl on the waterfront will find us irresistible. Well, those are the seagoing poems I'm going to read tonight. So I've made my living mainly as a carpenter for many, many years. Worked out of the Union Hall in San Francisco, built custom homes up in British Columbia, then came down here to Oregon in the 70s, worked out of the local Carpenters Union in Salem, and then eventually went to work in Corvallis at Oregon State University as a maintenance and repair carpenter. So here's a couple. This next poem takes place in Corvallis. It's called Immortality. In the 100 block of 12th Street, near the corner of Jackson, impressed in the sidewalk, a name and a date. W.S. Burnap, 1917. What's there to say about Burnap, whose legacy is a section of sidewalk he formed and poured on a back street in Corvallis 91 years ago? Burnap? Sure, I knew him. Worked with him once, a real son of a bitch. Saturday night at the Elks, we'd tie one on, and he'd get mean, mad dog, mean. Or maybe that's not true. Maybe he was a pussycat, upstanding citizen, family man, church on Sunday, and always with that peculiar urge to be remembered. Like another W.S., the poet Walter Savage Landor, who, to ensure that his poems would last, translated them into Latin, as if to impress them in concrete. Well, anyway, if you're walking 12th Street near the corner of Jackson, gaze down at the inscription W.S. Burnap, 1917. And as you continue on your way, step lightly, friends. Step lightly. So here's a final couple of poems. These are relatively new poems. So in the early days when I was younger, I did a lot of riding freight trains around the country. This was back in the late 50s, I guess. And this is a little memory of a particular train ride I took. It's called El Paso. It actually starts out, takes place, the memory begins anyway, in Corvallis. So the poem is called El Paso. The high whine of a train whistle, heard at dusk from the parking lot behind City Hall in Corvallis, is all it takes to put me back aboard a Southern Pacific freight crossing West Texas on a starry night in early spring 60 years ago. Stretched out on the deck of a flat car, looking up at the sky, I had the world on a string. I couldn't imagine the years ahead that would lead to my being here now, an old man telling you this. When I got off the train in El Paso, I knew my life would never again be the same. Here's a final poem. It's just called Another Day. 3 blue jays, 2 stellars, and a scrub jay, not frequently seen together, are perched on the branches of a dead mimosa, jutting out from the overgrown thicket of flowering quince, a tangle of green dotted with pink. 3 blue jays on a blustery morning in March. Almost 80 now, an octogenarian, I should have some words of wisdom to impart. But it turns out the infirmities and the indignities of old age, a tin can tied to a dog's tail, as Yeats says, are not necessarily conducive to wisdom. Now chickadees, nuthatches, finches, and juncos emerge from the thicket, and together with me and the jays, they celebrate our various forms of twittering, squawking, and hopping about, attest to our being alive on the planet, at least for another day. Thank you.